The morning light filtered through the tall windows of Adelaide Cottage as Catherine, Princess of Wales, stirred from sleep on what would become one of the most memorable birthdays of her life. At 44, she had grown accustomed to carefully orchestrated royal celebrations, photographers waiting to capture every smile, and gifts chosen more for their diplomatic significance than personal meaning. But this January morning held something different in the air, the unmistakable energy of three children who had been plotting in whispered conversations and stolen moments for weeks. What Catherine didn't know was that Prince George, Princess Charlotte, and Prince Louis had embarked on their most ambitious project yet. No palace staff had been consulted, no protocol officers briefed, and certainly no official gift lists approved. Instead, armed with nothing but their boundless creativity, pocket money saved from various royal allowances, and the kind of determination that only children possess when they want to surprise someone they love, the young royals had crafted something that would touch their mother's heart in ways no crown jewel ever could. As Catherine reached for her morning tea, completely unaware of the carefully hidden treasures waiting throughout the cottage, she had no idea that her children had managed to create what would later be described by royal watchers as the most genuine display of family love ever witnessed within the walls of a royal residence. The birthday that began like any other was about to unfold into a masterpiece of childhood ingenuity, sibling collaboration, and the kind of pure, unfiltered love that reminds us all why family matters more than any title or tradition. The real magic wasn't in the gifts themselves, but in the journey of how three young royals had learned to see their mother not as the future queen, but simply as the woman who bandaged their scraped knees, read them bedtime stories, and somehow managed to make even the most formal royal duties feel like adventures they were lucky to share. Part 1. The secret planning. The conspiracy had begun 3 weeks earlier in the most unlikely of places, the nursery bathroom at Adelaide Cottage, where 10-year-old Prince George had cornered his younger siblings during what was supposed to be routine teeth brushing time. 8-year-old Princess Charlotte had immediately dropped her toothbrush when George whispered the words that would change everything: "Mummy's birthday is coming, and we're going to make it the best one ever." 5-year-old Prince Louis, still struggling with the concept of keeping secrets but eager to be included in anything his older siblings planned, had nearly shouted his excitement before Charlotte quickly covered his mouth with her foam-covered hand. "Shoo, Louis. The whole point is that it has to be a surprise," she hissed, though her eyes were already sparkling with the same mischievous energy that George had ignited. The three children understood something that the adults around them often forgot: their mother, for all her royal duties and public appearances, cherished the simple moments of family life more than any state dinner or official ceremony. They had watched her face light up when they brought her drawings from school, had seen her carefully preserve every handmade card and crayon masterpiece in special boxes that she kept in her private study. They knew that what Catherine treasured most couldn't be bought in any of London's finest shops. George, as the eldest, had naturally assumed the role of chief coordinator. His plan was ambitious but beautifully simple. Each child would create something special that represented their unique relationship with their mother. "It can't be anything that costs lots of money," he had explained seriously to his siblings, channeling the same gravity he'd learned from watching his father handle royal business. "It has to come from us, from our hearts." Charlotte, ever the perfectionist and deeply influenced by her mother's love of photography and personal touches, immediately knew she wanted to create something visual. She had been watching Catherine's daily routines more carefully than anyone realized, noting the little moments that made her mother smile, the way she always paused to look at family photos on her dressing table, how she kept pressed flowers from their garden walks between the pages of her favorite books, the gentle expression she wore when she thought no one was watching her watch them play. Louis, not to be outdone despite his young age, had declared with characteristic enthusiasm that he wanted to make something that smells like Mummy's hugs. While his siblings initially laughed at this seemingly impossible goal, they quickly realized that Louis had identified something profound. Catherine did have a signature scent, a delicate combination of her favorite perfume and the lavender sachet she kept in her clothes drawers, mixed with the indefinable warmth that seemed to surround her whenever she pulled them close. The planning sessions took place in increasingly creative hiding spots around Adelaide Cottage. They huddled under George's bed during afternoon rest time, whispered plans while walking their family dog Orla in the garden, and even managed to have entire conversations in code during formal family dinners, much to the amusement of their father, who suspected something was brewing but wisely chose not to interfere. Their biggest challenge came from an unexpected source: the very people who loved Catherine most were also the ones most likely to accidentally spoil the surprise. The cottage staff, who had watched these children grow up and adored their genuine affection for their mother, kept offering to help or asking innocent questions that made the young conspirators increasingly nervous about maintaining their secret. "Master George," their housekeeper Mrs. Henderson had said one morning, noticing him carefully studying a calendar, "is there something special you're planning?" George had turned bright red and stammered something about a school project before quickly excusing himself, leaving Mrs. Henderson with a knowing smile and a mental note to perhaps be a little less observant for the next few weeks. The children's dedication to their project became evident in small ways that the adults around them began to notice but couldn't quite interpret. Charlotte started spending extra time in the garden, examining flowers and leaves with scientific intensity. George could be found in his father's study, carefully reading through books about art and creativity. Louis had developed a sudden fascination with the kitchen, asking endless questions about cooking and what made different foods smell the way they did. Prince William, watching his children's unusual behavior, found himself torn between paternal curiosity and respect for what was obviously an important project for them. He had learned through experience that his children's surprises for Catherine were always worth the wait, and he trusted them to create something meaningful. Still, he couldn't help but smile when he overheard fragments of their planning sessions, particularly Louis's increasingly elaborate descriptions of his mysterious gift. The security staff at Adelaide Cottage also found themselves inadvertently drawn into the conspiracy. The children had requested special permission for private time in various rooms of the house, always together, always with the door firmly closed. While protocol required that they know generally where the children were at all times, the guards had learned to give the family space for their personal moments, understanding that some things were too precious to monitor too closely. Catherine herself remained blissfully unaware of the elaborate planning happening under her roof. Her days were filled with the usual combination of royal duties, family time, and the countless small tasks that kept their household running smoothly. She noticed that her children seemed particularly excited about something, but attributed it to the general anticipation that surrounded any upcoming celebration in their house. The only hint she received came from Charlotte, who had always been the most naturally diplomatic of the three children. During one of their regular mother-daughter chats before bedtime, Charlotte had asked seemingly casual questions about Catherine's favorite memories from her own childhood birthdays. "What made them special, Mummy? Was it the presents or something else?" Catherine had answered thoughtfully, explaining how the gifts she remembered most clearly were the ones that showed someone had really listened to her, had noticed what mattered to her. "The best presents," Catherine had said, brushing Charlotte's hair as they talked, "are the ones that show someone knows your heart." She had no idea that her daughter was mentally filing away every word, preparing to turn that wisdom into the guiding principle for their secret project. As Catherine's birthday drew closer, the children's excitement became increasingly difficult to contain. They had established elaborate systems for hiding their works in progress, creating decoy activities to throw off any curious adults, and developing a complex schedule that would allow them to put finishing touches on their gifts without arousing suspicion. George had taken to carrying a small notebook where he carefully tracked every detail of their plan. His naturally organized personality had transformed their creative chaos into a precisely timed operation that would have impressed any royal event coordinator. He had assigned specific roles to each sibling, created backup plans for potential problems, and even prepared answers to likely questions from curious adults. Charlotte's artistic eye had proven invaluable in helping all three children refine their gifts. She had inherited Catherine's instinct for visual beauty and emotional impact, and her suggestions had elevated each of their projects beyond what they had initially imagined possible. Her own gift had evolved into something that she believed would capture not just images, but feelings and memories that her mother could hold on to forever. Louis, despite his young age, had surprised everyone with his persistence and attention to detail. His initial idea had grown into something far more sophisticated than anyone had expected from a 5-year-old, largely because his siblings had learned to take his instincts seriously. What had started as a simple concept had become a multi-layered creation that somehow managed to be both innocent and remarkably thoughtful. The night before Catherine's birthday, the three children held their final planning meeting in George's room, reviewing every aspect of their surprise one last time. They had rehearsed their timing, double-checked their hiding spots, and made sure that each gift was ready for the perfect moment of revelation. "Remember," George had whispered seriously to his siblings, "tomorrow isn't about impressing anyone or doing something that looks perfect for photographs. It's about showing Mummy that we see her, that we know how special she is, and that we love her not because she's going to be queen someday, but because she's our Mummy." Charlotte and Louis had nodded solemnly, understanding that they were part of something important, something that went beyond typical birthday celebrations and touched on the very essence of what made their family special despite the extraordinary circumstances of their lives. As they finally settled into sleep, each child's mind was filled with anticipation for the morning ahead. They had no way of knowing that their carefully planned surprise would create memories that Catherine would treasure for the rest of her life, or that their gifts would demonstrate a level of emotional intelligence and genuine love that would remind everyone who witnessed it why the future of the monarchy was in remarkably good hands. Part 2. The morning unfolds. Catherine woke to the gentle sound of whispers and muffled giggles echoing from somewhere in the cottage, a sound that had become as familiar as her morning alarm over the past 10 years of motherhood. January 9th had arrived with the crisp clarity that only winter mornings can provide, and, as she stretched beneath the warm duvet, she felt the particular contentment that came from knowing her family was happy and busy, even if she couldn't quite determine what they were busy with at such an early hour. Prince William had already left for his morning run, a routine that had become sacred to him as a way to clear his mind before the day's responsibilities began. Catherine smiled, knowing that he had probably been recruited into whatever conspiracy their children had been plotting, and that his absence this morning was likely strategic rather than coincidental. After 14 years of marriage, she had learned to recognize the subtle signs of when her husband was helping their children surprise her. The whispers grew closer, accompanied by the soft padding of small feet on the cottage's wooden floors. Catherine quickly closed her eyes and arranged herself in a convincing sleeping position, a skill she had perfected over years of Christmas mornings, birthday surprises, and impromptu performances that her children insisted required an audience, even if that audience was supposed to be asleep. The bedroom door opened with the careful precision that only children attempting stealth can achieve, which is to say, not very carefully at all, but with such concentrated effort that it somehow became endearing rather than disruptive. Catherine fought to keep her breathing steady as she heard the unmistakable sounds of 3 children trying to coordinate their movements without speaking aloud. "Is she still sleeping?" came Louis's voice in what he clearly believed was a whisper but was actually closer to his normal speaking volume. "Shoo!" Charlotte's actual whisper was sharp with big sister authority. "We practiced this, remember? George goes first, then me, then you." Catherine felt the mattress dip slightly as someone climbed carefully onto the bed. She recognized George's movement patterns, deliberate and thoughtful, already showing signs of the measured approach that would serve him well in his future role. He positioned himself near her shoulder, and she could sense him studying her face, trying to determine if she was truly asleep or merely pretending. "Happy birthday, Mummy," George said softly, and Catherine allowed her eyes to flutter open, meeting his serious gaze with the kind of smile that mothers reserve for moments when their children have clearly put enormous effort into making them happy. "Good morning, my darling," she murmured, reaching up to stroke his hair. "You're up very early for a Saturday." "We have important birthday business," Charlotte announced, abandoning any pretense of quiet as she bounced onto the bed beside her brother. Louis, not to be left out, scrambled up from the foot of the bed with the enthusiasm of someone who had been waiting for this moment for what felt like forever. Catherine sat up, pulling her robe around her shoulders and taking in the sight of her 3 children arranged around her, all practically vibrating with excitement. Each of them held something behind their back, and their faces showed the particular mixture of pride and nervousness that came from having worked hard on something they desperately hoped would be appreciated. "We made you presents," Louis declared, unable to contain himself any longer. "Real presents that we made with our own hands and everything. But there's a special order," George added quickly, shooting his younger brother a look that said he was moving too fast. "And you have to close your eyes for some of it." Catherine looked around at her children's eager faces and felt her heart swell with the kind of pure happiness that had nothing to do with royal duties or public expectations. This was the essence of what she treasured most about her life, these unguarded moments when her children were simply excited to share their love with her. "I'm ready," she said solemnly, understanding instinctively that this was a moment that required her full attention and appreciation. "What do I need to do?" George took charge with the natural authority of the eldest child. "First, you need to see Charlotte's present, because it goes with everything else we made." "Charlotte?" Charlotte, who had been fidgeting with whatever she held behind her back, suddenly seemed shy. It's not perfect, she began, displaying the perfectionist tendencies that Catherine recognized as being inherited directly from herself. I wanted to make it better, but George said we had to finish by today. I'm sure it's wonderful, sweetheart, Catherine encouraged gently. Can I see? Charlotte brought her hands forward, revealing a handmade photo album that immediately took Catherine's breath away. The cover was decorated with pressed flowers that Catherine recognized from their garden, arranged in a heart pattern and carefully laminated between clear sheets. The title, written in Charlotte's careful handwriting, read Mummy's Beautiful Moments. Oh, Charlotte, Catherine whispered, accepting the album with hands that trembled slightly. This is gorgeous. Open it, Louis urged, bouncing with impatience. She took pictures of everything. As Catherine opened the album, she discovered that Charlotte had indeed been documenting their family life with the eye of a natural photographer and the heart of a daughter who truly saw her mother. The photos weren't the formal, posed shots that filled their official albums, but candid moments that captured the real Catherine laughing while making pancakes with flour in her hair, reading bedtime stories with her voice animated by different character voices, sitting in the garden with dirt on her hands and pure contentment on her face. Each photo was accompanied by a small note in Charlotte's handwriting, explaining why that particular moment was special. This is when you made Louis laugh so hard that milk came out of his nose, and you laughed even harder than he did. This is you helping George with his school project, and you were so patient even though it took forever. This is when you picked flowers for Daddy's birthday and you looked so happy that I had to take a picture. Catherine realized that Charlotte had been studying her, really seeing her, in ways that she hadn't even been aware of herself. The album captured not just images, but emotions and personality traits that even she sometimes forgot she possessed. It was like looking at herself through the eyes of unconditional love, and the effect was both humbling and deeply moving. Charlotte, this is the most beautiful thing I've ever seen, Catherine said, her voice thick with emotion. You captured our life together so perfectly. I wanted to show you how we see you, Charlotte explained, suddenly, confident again. Not like the pictures in the newspapers or the magazines, but the real you that we get to have all to ourselves. George and Louis had been watching their mother's reaction carefully, and seeing her genuine delight with Charlotte's gift had bolstered their confidence about their own contributions. George cleared his throat importantly. My present goes next, he announced, because it's about the same kind of thing, but different. He produced what appeared to be a small wooden box that had been painted in soft blues and greens. Catherine could see that the painting had been done carefully but was clearly the work of a 10-year-old hand, which somehow made it more precious than any professional artwork could have been. I made this in woodworking class at school, George explained, but I painted it here, in secret. Mr. Peterson helped me with the joints and the hinge, but I did everything else myself. Catherine accepted the box, noting its solid construction and the obvious care that had gone into its creation. It's beautiful, George. What goes inside? That's the present, George said importantly. Open it. Inside the box, Catherine found a collection of small scrolls of paper, each tied with a different colored ribbon. There are 52 of them, George explained. One for every week of the year. They're all different things that I notice about you that make you special. Catherine selected one of the scrolls at random and unrolled it, reading aloud, the way you always know the right thing to say when I'm worried about school, and how you never make me feel silly for being nervous about things that seem easy for other people. She looked up at George, who was watching her intently. You wrote all of these? Every one, he confirmed proudly. Some of them are about big things, like how brave you are when you have to give speeches or meet important people. But most of them are about little things that I don't think you even know you do. Catherine unrolled another scroll, how you always save the best bite of your dessert for last, and sometimes you share it with us even when we already finished ours. And another, the way you hum while you're getting dressed in the morning, and it's always a different song, but it always sounds happy. Catherine realized that George had been observing her with the same careful attention that Charlotte had been photographing her, but his focus was on the small habits and characteristics that made up the fabric of daily life. He had noticed things about her that she wasn't even conscious of doing, and had taken the time to write them down as if they were treasures worth preserving. George, this is extraordinary, she said softly. You've given me a year's worth of reminders of who I am when I'm not thinking about being anyone in particular. That's my favorite version of you, George said simply, and Catherine felt her heart squeeze with the pure honesty of his statement. Louis, who had been remarkably patient during his siblings' presentations, was now practically bouncing off the bed. My turn. My turn. Mine is the best because it's magic. Charlotte and George exchanged glances, clearly wondering if their youngest brother's enthusiasm would live up to his confidence, but Catherine could see in their faces that they were genuinely curious about what Louis had created. His project had been the most mysterious of the three, and even his siblings weren't entirely sure what he had been working on. Close your eyes, Mummy, Louis instructed seriously. And hold out your hands. Catherine obeyed, and felt Louis place something soft and slightly warm in her palms. It felt like fabric, but with an unusual weight and texture that she couldn't immediately identify. Now smell it, Louis commanded. But keep your eyes closed. Catherine brought her hands closer to her face and inhaled, immediately understanding what Louis had meant about creating something that smelled like her hugs. The scent was a perfect reproduction of her favorite combinations: lavender, vanilla, and something warm and comforting that she couldn't name but recognized as the scent that seemed to linger in the children's hair after she had been cuddling with them. Louis, how did you manage this? She asked, her eyes still closed. I made you a special pillow, Louis announced proudly. But it's not just any pillow. Mrs. Henderson helped me find all the things that smell like you, and we put them inside special bags, and then I sewed them into the pillow myself. Well, Mrs. Henderson helped with the hard parts, but I did all the straight lines. Catherine opened her eyes to see a small decorative pillow that had clearly been crafted with enormous care and attention. The fabric was a soft cream color, and Louis had somehow managed to embroider her initial in the center using bright blue thread that, while not perfectly even, showed obvious effort and determination. The magic part, Louis continued excitedly, is that when you hug it, it will smell like our hugs, so even when you have to travel for work or we're at school, you can still have a hug whenever you want one. Catherine held the pillow close and realized that Louis, at 5 years old, had identified and solved a problem that she hadn't even articulated to herself: how much she missed the physical comfort of her children when duty required her to be away from them. His gift was both deeply practical and profoundly emotional, addressing a need that only someone who truly understood her heart could have recognized. Looking around at her 3 children, Catherine felt overwhelmed by the depth of thought and love that had gone into each of their gifts. They had seen her not as a public figure or even as a mother in the abstract sense, but as a complete person with specific quirks, needs, and qualities that they valued and wanted to celebrate. Part 3 Deeper Connections. Catherine sat surrounded by her children's gifts, each one telling a story not just about their individual personalities, but about the depth of their relationship with her. As she looked from Charlotte's photo album to George's box of weekly observations to Louis's comfort pillow, she began to understand that what her children had created was more than just birthday presents. They had crafted a mirror that reflected back to her exactly who she was in the eyes of the people who knew her best. Can I ask you something? Catherine said, gathering all 3 children closer to her on the bed. How did you all decide what to make? Did you plan this together, or did each of you just know? The children exchanged glances, and Catherine could see them silently debating how much to reveal about their planning process. Finally, Charlotte spoke up, her natural diplomacy making her the ideal spokesperson for the group. We talked about what makes you happiest, Charlotte explained carefully. Not like parties or fancy things, but what makes you get that special smile that you don't even know you're doing. You have different smiles for different things, George added, settling more comfortably against Catherine's side. There's your polite smile for when people are taking pictures, and your proud smile when we do something good at school, and your patient smile when Louis is being particularly Louis. Hey! Louis protested, but without any real indignation. But the best smile, Charlotte continued, is the one you get when you think no one is watching, and you're just happy about something small and ordinary. Like when you find a really pretty flower in the garden, or when Daddy makes you laugh at dinner, or when you're reading and you get to a part you really like. Catherine was struck by the sophistication of Charlotte's observation. At 8 years old, her daughter had not only noticed that people have different expressions for different occasions, but had specifically identified and categorized Catherine's various emotional states. It was the kind of emotional intelligence that Catherine hoped to nurture in all her children, but seeing it demonstrated so clearly was both impressive and slightly overwhelming. I wanted to show you all those hidden moments, Charlotte explained, opening her photo album again and flipping through several pages. The ones that don't make it into the newspapers or the official photo albums, but the ones that are actually the most important. George nodded seriously. And I wanted to write down all the things that make you special that aren't about being royal or having to do important jobs. Just the things that make you our mummy specifically. He reached for his wooden box and pulled out another scroll, unrolling it to read, the way you always check our rooms one more time after we're supposed to be asleep, just to make sure we're really okay and not just pretending to be okay. Catherine felt a flutter of surprise. She hadn't realized that the children knew about her late evening check-ins. It was something she did automatically, a compulsion born of love and the slight anxiety that came with being responsible for 3 young lives. She would quietly crack their doors and peek in, not to ensure they were following rules, but simply for the reassurance that came from seeing them safe and peaceful. "You know about that?" she asked softly. "We're not as sound asleep as we pretend to be," George admitted with a grin. "Especially Louis." "I like it when you check on us," Louis said matter-of-factly. "It makes me feel extra safe." "That's part of why I wanted to make you something that would make you feel safe too, even when we're not right there with you." Catherine looked down at the pillow in her lap, understanding now that Louis had been thinking about comfort and security in ways that were remarkably mature for his age. He had identified that she was someone who found peace in physical reminders of love, and had created something specifically designed to provide that comfort when her family wasn't immediately available. "How long have you been planning this?" Catherine asked, curious about the logistics of their conspiracy. 3 weeks, George answered promptly. "Ever since I realized your birthday was coming and I wanted to do something really special. Not like last year when we just picked out presents from the shop, but something that only we could make for you. The hardest part," Charlotte added, "was keeping it secret when you kept doing new things that I wanted to add to your album. Like last week when you were playing in the snow with us and you got that piece of snow stuck in your hair and you didn't even notice, but you looked so happy and silly that I really wanted to take a picture." "Why didn't you?" Catherine asked, touched by the image Charlotte had described. "Because then, you would have known I was taking pictures for something special," Charlotte explained practically. "The whole point was that you had to not know you were being photographed, so all the expressions would be real." Catherine realized that Charlotte had instinctively understood something about photography and authenticity that many professional photographers never grasped. The most meaningful images were often the ones captured when the subject was unaware and unguarded, when their true personality could shine through without the filter of self-consciousness. Plus, Louis added helpfully, "Charlotte said that if we told you about the pictures, you might start acting different when she was around, and then, the album wouldn't show the real you anymore." The sophistication of their planning continued to amaze Catherine. These weren't random acts of childhood creativity, but carefully thought-out projects that demonstrated genuine understanding of psychology, emotion, and human nature. Her children had essentially conducted an anthropological study of their mother, documenting her habits, preferences, and emotional patterns with the dedication of scientists and the love of family. "Can I see more of the photos?" Catherine asked, opening Charlotte's album to a random page. The page showed a series of pictures taken during what Catherine remembered as a particularly chaotic morning when nothing had gone according to schedule. In the photos, she was making breakfast while simultaneously helping George find a missing schoolbook and listening to Louis practice a song he was learning. Her hair was escaping from its ponytail, and there was what appeared to be jam on her cardigan. But Charlotte's photos had captured something Catherine hadn't noticed in the moment. The expression on her face showed someone who was genuinely enjoying the controlled chaos of family life. Despite the mess and the time pressure, she looked content, engaged, and even amused by the morning's complications. "This was when everything went wrong," Catherine said, studying the photos. "I remember feeling so frustrated that day." "But look at your face," Charlotte pointed out. "You weren't really frustrated. You were happy. Even when Louis was being loud and George couldn't find his book and breakfast was burning a little bit, you still looked like you were having fun with us." Catherine studied the photos more carefully and realized that Charlotte was absolutely right. What she had remembered as a stressful morning actually looked, from the outside, like a family enjoying each other's company despite minor inconveniences. It was a revelation about her own emotional state that she couldn't have had without seeing herself through her daughter's eyes. "I think," George said thoughtfully, "that's why we wanted to make these presents. Because sometimes you seem to forget how good you are at being our mummy, and we wanted to show you what we see when we look at you." The simple profundity of George's statement took Catherine's breath away. In her focus on fulfilling her royal duties and maintaining public expectations, had she lost sight of her success in the role that mattered most to her? Her children were essentially telling her that she was already everything they needed her to be, and that her value to them had nothing to do with external measures of success or failure. "You always worry about whether you're doing things right," Charlotte observed. "Like when you have to give speeches or meet important people, you practice and practice because you want to be perfect. But you don't need to worry about being perfect with us, because you already are perfect for us exactly the way you are." Louis nodded enthusiastically. "Even when you make mistakes or get grumpy or can't remember where you put your keys, you're still the best mummy. We don't need a perfect mummy, we just need our mummy." Catherine felt tears prick at her eyes as she realized that her children had given her something far more valuable than birthday gifts. They had given her permission to be human, to be imperfect, and to trust that their love for her wasn't conditional on her performance in any role, public or private. "Besides," George added with a grin, "we like some of your mistakes. Remember when you tried to make that fancy cake for Daddy's birthday and it completely collapsed? And, instead of being upset, you just started laughing and said we'd eat it with spoons and call it a deconstructed dessert," Charlotte continued, giggling at the memory. "That was more fun than any perfect cake would have been," Louis concluded decisively. Catherine realized that her children were teaching her something profound about authenticity and self-acceptance. They valued her not despite her imperfections, but as a complete person whose flaws and mistakes were just as much a part of what they loved about her as her strengths and successes. Looking around at her three children, Catherine felt a deep sense of gratitude not just for their thoughtful gifts, but for their wisdom and emotional generosity. They had somehow learned to see past the pressure and expectations that sometimes threatened to overwhelm her, focusing instead on the essential person beneath all the roles and responsibilities. "Thank you," she said softly, pulling all three children into a group hug. "Not just for the beautiful presents, but for seeing me so clearly and loving me so completely. You've given me the best birthday gift possible. You've reminded me who I really am." Part 4 Family Revelations. The morning had transformed from a simple birthday celebration into something far deeper and more meaningful than Catherine had expected. As she sat with her children's gifts surrounding her, she found herself wanting to understand more about how they had developed such profound insights into her character and needs. The sophistication of their observations suggested conversations and thinking that had been happening without her awareness. "Can I ask you something else?" Catherine said, adjusting Louis on her lap while keeping one arm around Charlotte and George. "When you were planning these gifts, did you talk about what it's like to be our family? I mean, with all the public attention and the special responsibilities we have?" The children exchanged glances again, and Catherine could see them weighing how honest to be about conversations that had obviously taken place during their planning sessions. "We did talk about that," George admitted slowly. "Because we wanted to make sure our presents were about you being our mummy, not about you being going to be queen someday. Sometimes," Charlotte added carefully, "it feels like other people only see the royal parts of you. Like when we're at official events and everyone wants to take pictures, they're not really seeing you, they're seeing the Princess of Wales. But we wanted our gifts to be about the real you." Catherine was struck by how clearly her children understood the distinction between her public role and her private self. She had always tried to shield them from the more complicated aspects of royal life, but it seemed they had developed their own sophisticated understanding of the pressures and expectations that surrounded their family. "Does it bother you that people see me that way?" Catherine asked gently, genuinely curious about their perspective on something that had been a central challenge of her adult life. "Not exactly bothered," George said thoughtfully. "Because we know that the royal stuff is important and helps people. But sometimes it makes us want to protect the parts of you that are just ours." Louis, who had been listening intently despite his young age, suddenly piped up with characteristic directness. "It's like you're two different people, but the real one is better than the fancy one." Charlotte laughed at her brother's blunt assessment. "Louis means that when you're being formal and royal, you're still nice and everything, but when you're just being our mummy, you're more fun and relaxed and silly." "I am silly, aren't I?" Catherine said with a smile, remembering some of their more ridiculous family moments. "The best kind of silly," George assured her. "Like when you do voices for all the characters when you read to us, even the really dramatic ones that make you sound completely ridiculous. Or when you dance while you're cooking and you think we can't see you from the dining room," Charlotte added, grinning. "Or when you play hide and seek and you always pick hiding spots that are way too small for you, but you squeeze into them anyway and then get stuck," Louis concluded, bouncing with delight at the memory. Catherine laughed, realizing that her children had been cataloging these unguarded moments of playfulness and storing them up as treasures. What she had sometimes worried might be undignified behavior was actually what they valued most about her. "I think," she said slowly, "you three understand something about balancing different parts of life that it took me years to figure out." "How did you get so wise?" "We learned it from watching you," Charlotte said simply. "You showed us that you can be serious when you need to be serious, and fun when it's time to be fun, and that both of those things are important. Plus," George added, "Daddy always tells us that the most important job you'll ever have is being our mummy, and that everything else is just extra responsibility on top of that." Catherine felt a rush of gratitude toward William for reinforcing that message with their children. In a world where their future roles could easily overshadow their present family life, it was crucial that the children understood their primary identity as a family unit. "He's right about that," Catherine confirmed. "Being your mummy is the role I'm proudest of and the one I want to do best at, even when it's challenging." "That's another thing we noticed," Louis said importantly. "You never pretend that being a mummy is easy. You tell us when you're figuring things out or when you don't know the right answer." Catherine was surprised by this observation. She had always tried to project confidence and stability for her children, but apparently they had noticed and appreciated the moments when she had been honest about her uncertainties. "Is that a good thing?" she asked, genuinely curious about their perspective. "It's the best thing," Charlotte said emphatically. "Because it means we don't have to pretend to be perfect either. When you don't know something, you figure it out or ask for help, and that teaches us that it's okay not to know everything." George nodded seriously. "And when you make mistakes, you apologize or try to fix them, which shows us how to handle our mistakes too." Catherine realized that her children had been learning life lessons not from her formal attempts at teaching, but from observing how she navigated daily challenges and uncertainties. Her imperfections, which she sometimes worried about, were actually serving as valuable demonstrations of how to be human in a healthy way. "There's something else," George said, his voice taking on the serious tone he used when he had been thinking deeply about something. "We wanted these gifts to remind you that you don't have to earn our love by being perfect at everything. You already have it just because you're you." The mature wisdom of this statement from her 10-year-old son left Catherine momentarily speechless. Somehow, her children had identified and addressed an anxiety she hadn't even fully acknowledged to herself, the fear that her love from her family might be contingent on her success in her various roles and responsibilities. "How did you know I needed to hear that?" Catherine asked softly. "Because sometimes you look worried when you think we're not paying attention," Charlotte explained. "Like you're afraid you're not doing something right or that you're disappointing someone." "But you never disappoint us," Louis added with 5-year-old certainty. "Even when you have to work late or travel for important meetings, we're still proud of you and we still miss you and we still love you exactly the same amount." Catherine felt tears beginning to form as she recognized the generosity and emotional maturity her children were displaying. They had somehow learned to separate her worth as a person from her performance in any particular role, and they were trying to give her permission to do the same for herself. "We also noticed," George continued, "that you worry about us, about whether we're okay with all the attention and special circumstances of our life. So we wanted to show you that we are okay, and that a lot of what makes us okay is watching how you handle everything. You're like our example of how to be brave and kind and normal all at the same time," Charlotte explained. "When people are taking pictures or when we have to do formal events, we watch you to see how to behave. But, also when we're just playing or having regular family time, we watch you to see how to be happy. Catherine was overwhelmed by the realization that her children saw her as a role model not just for royal behavior, but for how to navigate life with grace and authenticity. The pressure of that responsibility was balanced by the profound honor of knowing that they trusted her guidance so completely. The best part about our family, Louis said, settling more comfortably against Catherine's side, is that even though we have to do special things sometimes, mostly we just get to be a regular family. And you're the one who makes that possible. We know other children whose parents are famous or important, George added, and some of them seem like they never get to just relax and be normal. But you and Daddy make sure we have lots of time for ordinary things. Catherine thought about the conscious effort she and William put into maintaining normalcy for their children: regular bedtimes, household chores, consequences for misbehavior, and time for unstructured play. It was gratifying to know that the children not only noticed these efforts but valued them. Speaking of ordinary things, Charlotte said with a mischievous grin, there's one more part to our birthday surprise, but it involves going downstairs. And it's something Daddy helped with, but only a little bit, George added quickly. Mostly it was our idea and our work. Catherine looked at their excited faces and realized that the morning's revelations were far from over. Should I get dressed first, or is this a pajamas-appropriate surprise? Pajamas are perfect, Louis declared. This surprise is definitely a pajamas kind of surprise. As Catherine gathered her gifts and prepared to follow her children downstairs, she reflected on how much this morning had already given her. Beyond the thoughtful presents, she had gained insights into her children's emotional intelligence, their understanding of family dynamics, and their perspective on the unique challenges and privileges of their life together. She realized that while she had been focused on teaching and guiding them, they had been equally focused on understanding and supporting her. The morning had revealed a family dynamic built on mutual care, observation, and acceptance that went far beyond typical parent-child relationships. Following her children toward whatever final surprise awaited downstairs, Catherine felt profoundly grateful not just for their thoughtfulness, but for the wisdom and emotional generosity they had inherited or developed. Whatever challenges lay ahead for their family, she felt confident that they would face them together, with the kind of understanding and support that made any burden lighter and any joy more complete. Part 5, the perfect ending. Catherine followed her children down the stairs of Adelaide Cottage, still clutching their precious gifts and feeling as though she was walking through a dream. The morning had already surpassed every birthday she could remember, but the anticipation on her children's faces suggested that their surprises weren't quite finished yet. As they approached the kitchen, Catherine could detect the unmistakable aroma of something baking, mixed with what smelled like her favorite coffee brewing. The children positioned themselves strategically around her, clearly wanting to observe her reaction to whatever awaited behind the kitchen door. Before we go in, George said importantly, you have to understand that this wasn't supposed to be fancy or perfect. We just wanted it to be special in our way. And if anything looks a little messy or weird, Charlotte added quickly, it's because we did most of it ourselves and we're still learning. Louis, bouncing with barely contained excitement, grabbed Catherine's hand. But it smells really good, doesn't it? We started working on it when it was still dark outside. Catherine pushed open the kitchen door and immediately understood what had captured Louis's enthusiasm. The normally pristine kitchen showed clear evidence of significant child-led cooking activity, but the chaos had been organized into something beautiful and purposeful. The large farmhouse table had been transformed into an intimate breakfast setting, complete with her favorite tablecloth, fresh flowers from their garden, and place settings that mixed their everyday dishes with special touches that could only have come from the children's careful attention to detail. But it was the breakfast itself that took her breath away. Someone clearly with minimal adult supervision based on the creative presentations had prepared every single one of Catherine's favorite morning foods, arranged with the kind of love that made presentation details irrelevant. We made everything ourselves, Charlotte announced proudly. Well, Daddy helped us use the stove for safety, but all the recipes and decorating and planning were ours. The centerpiece was a stack of pancakes that bore a strong resemblance to Catherine's face, complete with chocolate chip eyes and a strawberry smile. Surrounding this edible portrait were small bowls of fresh berries, perfectly sliced fruit arranged in flower patterns, scrambled eggs that had somehow been tinted a delicate yellow with what Catherine suspected was a careful application of turmeric, and toast cut into heart shapes using cookie cutters. The pancake face was Louis's idea, George explained, but Charlotte figured out how to make it actually look like you instead of just like a random person. And George made the fruit flowers, Charlotte added, because he remembered that you always arrange fruit nicely when you make breakfast for us, and he wanted to do the same thing for you. William appeared from behind the kitchen island, wearing an apron that was decorated with small handprints and flour smudges, clear evidence of his role as kitchen supervisor rather than chef. His face showed the particular expression of paternal pride mixed with slight exhaustion that came from supervising an ambitious cooking project undertaken by 3 determined children. I was strictly quality control and safety management, he said, kissing Catherine's cheek. Everything you see here was planned, prepared, and executed by our children, who have been awake since 5 o'clock this morning making sure every detail was perfect. Catherine looked around the kitchen with new eyes, noticing details that revealed the depth of thought that had gone into this final surprise. Her favorite coffee mug sat at her place setting, already filled with coffee prepared exactly the way she liked it. A small vase held flowers that she recognized from their garden, arranged with the same careful eye for color and composition that Charlotte had displayed in her photo album. Even the small mistakes and imperfections told stories of love and effort. The heart-shaped toast was slightly uneven because Louis had insisted on cutting his own pieces. The fruit flowers showed signs of multiple attempts and revisions where George had clearly worked to achieve exactly the right visual effect. The pancake portrait bore the unmistakable marks of Charlotte's perfectionist tendencies, with strategic placement of chocolate chips that had obviously been adjusted multiple times. "How long have you been planning this breakfast?" Catherine asked, settling into the chair that the children had designated as hers. "Since the very beginning," George answered promptly. "We knew that the presents were important, but we also wanted to make the whole morning special. Not just for a few minutes, but for as long as possible. Plus," Louis added, climbing into his own chair with enthusiasm, "we wanted to cook for you the way you cook for us. You always make our food special and pretty and exactly how we like it, so we wanted to do that for you too." Catherine tasted the coffee and found it perfectly prepared, which surprised her given that the children rarely paid attention to the specific details of how she liked her morning coffee prepared. "This is exactly right. How did you know?" "We've been watching," Charlotte admitted with a grin. "For weeks, every morning, we took turns observing how much milk you add and how long you stir it and everything." George even took notes. George looked slightly embarrassed but proud. "I wanted to make sure we got it right. You do so many little things to take care of us, and most of the time we don't even notice until we try to do them ourselves." As Catherine began to eat the breakfast her children had prepared, she was struck by how perfectly it captured their individual personalities while also representing their collaborative effort. Louis's exuberant creativity was evident in the playful presentation and the pancake portrait. Charlotte's attention to visual detail showed in the careful arrangement and color coordination. George's methodical approach was reflected in the thoughtful preparation and the way everything had been timed to be ready simultaneously. But, beyond their individual contributions, the breakfast represented something more significant: their understanding of what made Catherine feel cared for and appreciated. They had recognized that for her, love was often expressed through the preparation and sharing of food, through the creation of beautiful and welcoming spaces, and through attention to small details that made ordinary moments feel special. "This is absolutely incredible," Catherine said, pausing between bites to look around at her family. "Not just the food, which is delicious, but everything about this morning. You've given me the most meaningful birthday I've ever had." William, who had been watching the morning unfold with obvious pleasure, settled into his own chair with a cup of coffee. "They've been planning this for weeks," he said. "I've never seen them so focused on a single project or so determined to get every detail right." "We wanted to show you what you mean to us," Charlotte explained seriously. "Not just tell you, but really show you by paying attention to all the things that matter to you. And we wanted to prove that we notice how much you do for us," George added. "Sometimes we probably seem like we take it for granted, but we don't really. We see everything you do to make our life good, and we wanted to do the same thing for you." Catherine felt overwhelmed by the maturity and thoughtfulness her children were displaying. At their young ages, they had already learned to express love through action, to pay attention to others' needs and preferences, and to invest time and effort in making someone else happy. These were life skills that many adults struggled with, yet her children seemed to have developed them naturally through observation and practice within their family. "You know what the best part of all this is?" Catherine said, looking around the table at her family. "It's not just that you made me feel special, though you absolutely did. It's that you showed me how well you understand what it means to love someone and take care of them." Louis, who had been working his way through his own breakfast with characteristic enthusiasm, looked up importantly. "That's because you taught us how to do it by doing it for us every day." "We learned it by watching you," Charlotte confirmed. "The way you always know when we need extra hugs, or when we're worried about something even if we don't say it, or when we're getting sick before we even feel sick ourselves." George nodded seriously. "You pay attention to all the little things that matter to each of us individually. Like how I like my sandwiches cut diagonally but Charlotte likes hers in rectangles, and how Louis needs his stuffed elephant at bedtime but only if it's positioned exactly the right way." Catherine realized that her children had been studying her methods of caring for them and had applied those same principles to caring for her. They had observed her attention to detail, her efforts to personalize her care for each of them, and her belief that love was best expressed through consistent, thoughtful actions rather than grand gestures. "And the really important thing," Charlotte added, "is that you never make us feel bad for needing different things or for changing our minds about what we need. You just adjust and keep taking care of us in whatever way works best." "That's what we wanted to do for you today," George explained. "Take care of you in ways that are specifically right for you, not just generic nice things that any mother might like." As the family finished their breakfast together, Catherine reflected on how much this morning had taught her about her own parenting and about the kind of family culture she and William had successfully created. Their children had learned to be observant, thoughtful, and generous with their love. They had developed emotional intelligence, creativity, and the ability to work together toward a common goal. Most importantly, they had learned to see her as a complete person worthy of the same kind of care and attention she provided for them. In a world where children often took their parents' efforts for granted, her children had somehow learned to notice, appreciate, and reciprocate the love they received. "I have one more thing to say about all of this," Catherine said as they began to clear the breakfast dishes together. "You three have given me something even more valuable than wonderful gifts and a perfect breakfast. You've shown me that the way we love each other in this family is working. You've learned how to see each other clearly, how to express love through action, and how to make each other feel valued and understood. That means," William added, wrapping his arms around Catherine from behind as she stood at the sink, "that when you're older and have your own families, you'll already know how to create the kind of love and connection that makes everything else in life better." The children beamed at this recognition, understanding instinctively that they had accomplished something significant beyond simply planning a nice birthday surprise. As the morning settled into the comfortable rhythm of family cleanup and conversation, Catherine felt a deep sense of contentment and gratitude. Her children had given her more than gifts, they had given her confirmation that the love she poured into their family was being received, absorbed, and reflected back to her in ways that exceeded her highest hopes. Looking around at her family as they worked together to restore the kitchen to order, Catherine realized that this birthday would remain in her memory not because of any individual present or gesture, but because it had shown her the beautiful, complex, and deeply loving family dynamic they had built together. In a world full of external pressures and public expectations, this morning had reminded her that their greatest achievement was simply the love they shared with each other, expressed in countless small acts of attention, care, and understanding. It was, she thought, the perfect way to begin another year of the most important job she would ever have, being the mother of these three remarkable children who had already learned to love with such wisdom, generosity, and joy.